Congress, and you are the Democratic challenger to our incumbent Brian Mast. So we have a lot of questions, and we're going to cover a lot of topics, and thank you for coming in today to let people get to know you better.
And thank you for having me, Casey. Like I was saying, this is such an important show. Local news and local journalism is a cornerstone of our democracy. So I'm grateful for everything you do.
I appreciate that. We're going to have a special caller that will be coming in a little bit later this hour. But folks, in the meantime, if you have a question or comment for Thomas, please tune in over the Facebook Live feed and type those questions in, and I can share those with Thomas. And before we get started with the show, I want to remind everybody that this Sunday, October 6th, from 8:30 to 12, 8:30 a.m. to 12, is the Home Ownership Education and Literacy Program for veterans, and that's going to be at the Blake Library there in Stewart, right next to the County Commission Office, 2351 Southeast Monterey Road. If you go to the John F. and Rita M. Armstrong Wing, again, this is a really important workshop for veterans, home ownership education literacy program. So give them a shout out. You can email kdiane@nova.edu for more information. And also, it's still hurricane season, as we know, and you know, our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody that has absolutely been devastated. The lives that have lost is over 160. I've heard this morning. It's just so devastating, but our thoughts and prayers go out to all of you. In particular, here local, we've had so many drives to help out everybody, and Casco Tools, big shout out to you. You have a truckload leaving this afternoon, so if you have some supplies, you want to get on that truck, Casco Tools down in Port Salerno is collecting those supplies. And with that, Indiantown Marina and Indiantown Marine Center, both of those are great places for hurricane storage. If you need a place to store your boat, please keep them in mind. And also, they're full service boat yards that you can do all your work. And two of my wonderful supporters that I love having in the studio from time to time as well, but great place to store your boat. Indiantown Marine Center, FL.com, 772-597-0800, and IndiantownMarina.com. And finally, don't forget about Susie Nash. She's going to be back in town at Archie's end of the month. So great country western singer. Thomas, she's fantastic. She's in her 50s and just really hitting her stride now with her music. And she's got over 1 million followers or listens in on Spotify. Nice. So it's never too late, folks. Never too late. So without further ado, Thomas Witkop, I grabbed this from your website just to give people a little background. Witkop, W-I-T-K-O-P, folks. Witkopforcongress.com. He is taking on the establishment. He's refused all donations from national political parties and corporations. We need our leaders to represent the voters of the Treasure Coast, not special interest. Development is destroying our state, and his opponent, Brian Mast, has taken almost $1 million from developers, including the Jack Nicklaus family. He hunts wild boar, spearfish for snapper, and birdwatch for the scrub jay. He believes we need to protect the real Florida. He's been endorsed by the Sierra Club and pledges to support legislation that protects our coastline and natural resources for generations to come. He's a renter, and he worries that they'll never be able to afford a home. We need to take on the affordability crisis, and that starts with lowering home insurance. Home insurance has increased by 300% since Brian Mast took office, and it's making it difficult for people like Thomas to afford rent and save for a home. He lives in Florida with his fiancée, who teaches at a public high school, and before running for office, he worked at the Neighborhood Resource Center in Jupiter that helps people find jobs. He believes in hard work and the American dream. If we can help people find good, high-paying jobs and provide for the family, we can rebuild our country, says Thomas. I'm running for office to stop developers, defend freedom, and make life affordable again. So welcome, Thomas. We got a lot of questions and things to cover, but again, folks want to look you up. It's witkopforcongress.com. So let's just get right down to it. We got a lot of topics, as I said, and folks, if you have a question, type them in on Facebook, and we'll definitely be covering them. So let's start. You mentioned, you enjoyed bird watching and going out. Jonathan Dickinson Park was a big issue. What steps will you take to protect Florida's natural environment, including the Everglades and the coastline?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one place where my opponent says the right thing, but if we look at the voting record, we have to make sure we're holding our politicians, all politicians on both sides of the aisle, accountable that they're following up with their convictions. And let's start with Jonathan Dickinson State Park. Just last year, there was a vote in Congress to expand the Endangered Species Act to also protect threatened species like the scrub jay, which is considered federally threatened. And I would have voted to more strictly protect the scrub jay to make sure that voters and constituents had a recourse in the case that there wasn't the whistleblower, and in the case that DeSantis and the Florida dominated, or the Florida state legislature tried to put 3 golf courses on Jonathan Dickinson State Park. And we would have been able to say, hey, it says right here in the Endangered Species Act that there's a scrub jay on there. There's a handful of other threatened species on there. Therefore, you cannot build these golf courses on the Jonathan Dickinson State Park. And that's not just, the Endangered Species Act. We're finding that in Florida, we need the federal government to, and before I go any further, I think it's important to note that there is bloat in the federal government, and there is instances where we really need to cut it down. But as far as the environment goes, the state legislature of Florida continues to prove that it will not protect our environment. It will allow dredge and fill operations that hurt our waterways. It'll allow development or quote unquote improvements on our state parks. So there are numerous instances where the federal government can be our last backstop, our last defense for our natural resources that are so critical here in Florida that the state government is not protecting.
So to do that, of course, you have to reach across the aisle. So, how would you foster bipartisanship and work across the aisle and get things done in Congress?
Yes, absolutely. And there was a bill actually, again, just last year, bipartisan infrastructure bill. That was what it's called, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. And it had $1.1 billion of Everglades restoration in it. Yet Congressman Mass voted against it. And I was so confused because that's always his number one issue is the Everglades and the environment. And he voted no, Florida doesn't want the $1.1 billion of Everglades restoration. And it was because it had maybe a handful of other things that he didn't completely agree with. And this is something that I'm willing to keep an open mind about. This is how democracy is made it to its best, is conversation, is entering, environments that aren't folks that agree with you necessarily. It's talking to people across the aisle. And I know we actually met at a Rotary Club, actually, which is a great instance of bipartisanship. That doesn't have anything to do with politics, but it brings people from all backgrounds together
Right.
to talk about what they care about, which is the community. And from there, I joined you at the Young Republicans Club and had really great conversation with some folks, learned a lot. And as a young person, and I know many young people, and not just young people, but disenfranchised people can relate to this, but we're tired of these like insane political divisions, these two tribes that seem to be at war with one another. Congressman Mass likes to send emails that say, I'm officially Team Trump. He has this insignia with the gold Team Trump. And I like to say, I'm not Team Trump. I'm not Team Harris. I'm Team America. This is something that distinguishes the normal, everyday person from the politicians we have right now. I'm not taking a nickel from the National Democratic Party. I agree with Republicans on many instances. I agree with Democrats on many instances. At the end of the day, I am a Democrat because I really do care so much about the environment and making sure that we protect it.
And something to be brought up here, you are the youngest person running for United States Congress. You're 25 years old, so you're really bringing a younger person's perspective where so many times the younger generation is not involved with politics, Thomas. So here you're just 25, and this is a really big race to bite off for your first race. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a big part of it was because so many young people aren't involved in politics. I was talking to my buddies, both Democrats and Republicans, and they're kind of throwing their hands up saying politics is so corrupted by big money and special interests, and the politicians are so two-faced, and I don't even want to get involved with it. And that was really worrying for me because I deeply believe in democracy. I still believe in the American dream. I believe that this is a country where you can work hard and achieve your dream. And I want to make sure that it stays that way for generations to come. So I said, all right, let's get involved with the process. Let's look at some advocacy groups, maybe learn about the different parties. And I quickly discovered that there was nobody running against Brian Mast. And I said, this is one guy that I think is feeding the division in the country and isn't really helping the problems and is being bought by special interests. So I'm going to hold him accountable. I'm going to run for office, and I'm going to say at the top of my lungs, we need change.
And speaking of that, let's talk about, I call it insider stock trading. It's one of the few places that you can have insider information, and that's Capitol Hill and trade stocks. The rest of us get thrown in jail if we do that. Folks, Unusual Whales, if you Google them, you can go to their website. They keep track. It's one of the great places. They keep track of congressional trading, insider trading. And Brian Mast, he's up 17% since he's taken office. Nancy Pelosi, she is uncharted. It's so her returns are unbelievable. So it's both sides of the aisle that's doing this. But what is your stance on stock trading in Congress? You get all this inside information.
You nailed it, Casey. It's happening on both sides of the aisle, and it shouldn't be. I mean, something that they passed, the Stock Act, and I don't remember what the acronym is exactly. Stop insider trading in Congress. And just a few months ago, I think it was a month ago or two, Brian Mast was cited again for having a conversation with the CEO of Virgin Galactic, and then shortly afterward, and he's on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee that oversees a lot of what that guy's dealing with. And shortly afterwards, he buys over $100,000 in stock of Virgin Galactic and doesn't report it federally until after the deadline. And he just gets a little slap on the wrist.
Slap on the wrist.
This stuff makes no sense to me, and it's because and you nailed it. It's happening on both sides of the aisle. It's because the people that are designing the rules for this sort of punishment or this sort of accountability are the ones that have to face the punishment and accountability. So I think that, it's up to us voters who look through this stuff and say, you know what, this is completely unacceptable. We cannot support politicians that are using insider trading to benefit themselves personally.
In your narrative, you talked about being able to buy a home. Rents are high, but what about the American dream of buying the home? And there's two components to that, and we're going to talk about insurance first, because you talked about addressing the high insurance needs, which is absolutely astronomical here in Florida. And now we just had Hurricane Helene come through. We're all expecting it to go up even more. How do you see a solution for this? This is something that is at the forefront of every Floridian, and probably Americans, but certainly here every Floridian.
Yeah, no question about it. It's home insurance is the number one issue in Florida. It's 427% of the national average, and it's increased 300% in the past 6 or 7 years. We need to address it, and it's clear to me that the state legislature is failing to do that. So I think that, and I believe that this is supported by many experts, that we need to bring this to a federal level. We need to make it so that we pool risk, not just with Florida, where a hurricane comes in and 11 insurance companies go belly up. Instead, we pool risk with California that's facing wildfires, or Arizona that has droughts. It looks like we just got a call.
We did. We have a surprise caller in that very excited. Many of you will know who this person is. And you're on the line with us, right, Patrick Murphy?
Hey, Casey, how you doing?
I am good. How are you doing?
Good. It's been too long. I miss you.
I know it. We miss you too, believe me. And it has been way too long. I see you on Facebook. You're very busy with a lot of things. But wow, do we have somebody that reminds me a lot of you in the studio today. He's a young, energetic, very involved with politics, young man that just wants to get out there and help change the world and make it a better place. So, Patrick, tell us a little bit about what's going on and how you have been supporting Thomas.
Yes, well, thank you. I had a chance to get lunch with Thomas and his team and some of our mutual friends recently, and really enjoyed meeting them. And I look back at my first race, and hard to believe, but I think I was 28 years old when I first decided to run. And I guess, a lot of similarities to be drawn there with Thomas and myself, both young, hungry young men that want to make a difference in our communities, right? And passionate about the environment, passionate about helping people make sure that they have a better life, right? And the divisive politics that we've all unfortunately become accustomed to is not the way forward. And I know Thomas believes that as well. Most of our conversation was dominated by him talking about, finding that middle ground, how we can actually get things done. talking about some of the things that I did when I was in D.C. and how he wants to work with the other side to solve problems for our community. And that's what matters, right? People want to get things done. So, one of the things I told him was run like a mayor, right? Run like someone that is trying to get things done locally, because the politics of D.C. has gotten so nasty. You have to find those local issues to really focus on.
Patrick, I appreciate you calling in and saying those things, because that's one thing that you did very well. You came into a district that was traditionally Republican, you won it as a Democrat, and then you really brought even more support after you were elected, because you were able to work across the aisle and you brought in so much support. You were the first one that really brought our water issues to the D.C. level and really made folks in Washington, D.C. notice our discharges, Lake Okeechobee, how disastrous it was for the area. So it's just so important to have somebody in this seat that is able to work across that aisle.
Well, it was teamwork, right? It was people like you, Casey, and all of our friends that helped make that a reality. And again, I think that's something that Thomas is going to focus on, is reaching across the aisle to say, look, I'm not trying to be partisan when I go to D.C. I'm gonna get Republicans, Democrats, Independents alike. We're all constituents of the same community, and we care about the environment, right? And as you know, we had that big fly-in in Washington, D.C., and I think it was at 2013. I think it was during the government shutdown,
Yes.
right? And we had
Yes.
dozens and dozens of people take the time, spend their money to come to Washington and talk to lawmakers about what was really going on in our community and these discharges that just, continue, plaguing Florida, quite frankly. So, again, it's because of the bipartisan nature that you can actually, I think, make progress. And getting lawmakers from both sides of the aisle to find a local issue to agree on is still, those days aren't behind us, right? Some of the big macro issues on immigration and women's rights and things like that are still very divisive. But the local issue, I have found, are areas you can actually find agreement, something I know Thomas is going to be a real champion for.
Well, Patrick, I appreciate you calling in. And before I let you go, I just want you to reach out to the Republican constituents here in the district, because you were very successful at that. And just, it's been a little while since you've been in office, and a lot of new people have moved here. And Patrick, it was exciting times when you were representing us here. At the time, it was CD 18. But I just want you to just put out a message to Republican voters why they should, take a listen to Thomas Witkop and what he can bring to the table.
Thomas is going to work his butt off for the community. He's going to reach across the aisle to solve problems. He cares about helping small businesses. He cares about helping the little guy who's trying to make it. He cares about education. He cares about the environment. He cares about seniors, right? These are all issues that I think unite Thomas, will unite him to Republicans and Democrats alike in the district, and ultimately want to solve the problems, right, that are in front of us. Thomas isn't, talking about what's the next seat he can run for, governor or this or that, right? He just wants to work hard for the community. And ultimately he's going to do what's right, not fall into the party line and just do and say what he's told. And I think that's admirable these days. So I hope everyone has an open mind. I hope everyone keeps looking down ballot at the ticket. So many folks just vote, party line all the way down. We need more and more people to be, independent-minded and look at each candidate for what they really stand for. And that's something that, we were able to do, is make sure people looked at the individual. And I know Thomas is working really hard in the community to get his message out. So I'm happy to support him. It's great to hear your voice, Casey, and I miss all of our friends in the community.
I sure do as well. Thank you, former Congressman Patrick Murphy. Appreciate the call-in and the great endorsement here with Thomas.
Thanks, Patrick. And nobody brings people together like Patrick Murphy. So you heard some of the playbook just now, and every time we talk, I learn. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hey, get out and register to vote, right? We got
Yes,
2 days left, so
100%,
get out and
100%.
register.
Good message. Thanks so
Awesome.
much, Patrick.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. What a great time that was to hear from Patrick Murphy. He represented this area very well, and it was you just remind me so much of him. By the way, Thomas, he's a young, energetic guy. Both of you are so young. You'll be a little bit younger than Patrick should you be elected. So,
but he was still the youngest congressional member at the time. Yeah,
he was,
and he did so much for this district. I mean, we were just talking yesterday about the Veterans Bridge right here in Martin County,
yes.
and he was the one responsible for that.
And that's huge. That was a a really big deal. It was a contentious, actually, issue for a lot of years here in Martin County, but then it finally got built. And, I go by that bridge every day driving my daughter to school, and people are out biking, they're out walking, and the flags are flying. It's just like one of my favorite places to drive now.
Yeah.
So really, really neat. But let me go back to affordable housing. There was another part of that I wanted to touch base on because this is such a huge issue. And that is there's just to give you a little background, it's more of a own to rent philosophy that's going on. So back in the 1980s, you didn't hear about corporations owning homes. It really started happening in 2008 with the financial meltdown, where corporations are coming in, they're scooping up single family homes. And, a matter of fact, right now they own about 2 to 5% of all single family homes nationwide. And they're renting them out. They have no intention of ever selling them again, and they have the money to just come in and purchase. And it's part of the reason a lot of folks believe that we have such an increase in our housing. It's becoming unaffordable. We're being forced to only rent, and it's particularly focused in the Sun Belt, which is Florida, Georgia, Arizona, Texas, and in Florida here, really focused in Miami, Orlando, the Tampa markets. So this is a really big deal. Blackstone is one of them. Invitation Homes, they own over 80,000 homes. So there's a big push out there for corporations to buy up all our single-family homes. Very little has been done about it legislatively. Thomas, there was one, Jeff Merkley, he's a Democrat from Oregon, that tried to pass a bill, Stop Wall Street Landlords Act, but it didn't pass. But other than that, there's been very little talk about that. So I just want to hear you weigh in on this issue and what you would do in Congress. I think it's going to only get larger and bigger until somebody addresses the fact that our single-family homes are not being purchased by families anymore.
Yeah, and this is another area where I think there is some bipartisan consensus that Blackstone shouldn't own the single family homes that it does and shouldn't drive up the price for American families struggling to make a living and struggling to live that American dream. We know that owning a home is critical for the American dream, and that's declining, especially among young folks. When my parents were 30, buying a home was far more attainable than when I will be 30. And that is not only just owning a home, it's a sense of belonging, it's a sense of community. This is an interesting story, but when I was running for office, I said, you know what, I ought to attend my HOA because I'm going to all these different HOA meetings, and I went over to the HOA, and they said, oh, you actually can't be here because you're a renter, and you don't actually have any stake in this community. And they said it in an almost aggressive way like that. And I love my neighbors, by the way. But the HOA was like, you're a renter, and you just doesn't. So I was walking back thinking to myself, and this is really what has driven me to work on home insurance so much, is why can't I afford a home? Why is it such a unfeasible idea for my friends and myself? And it goes to this home insurance, and it's not just hard for the home insurance is often passed down to renters. My landlord often says, hey, rent has to increase because I just had another increase in my premiums. And that's what makes it impossible to save and then to buy a house. And it's because of companies like Blackstone, which again contribute to members of both parties. And that's why we need folks like me who are going to yell at the top of my lungs, this is unacceptable, and I'm not taking money from Blackstone, and they shouldn't be owning single family properties.
Another topic, what is your stance on immigration reform, and particularly in relation to Florida's immigration population?
Yeah, this is a great question.
Population.
There's no question that what's going on at the border is chaotic and needs to be addressed. We need to fund our border security agents to make sure that our border is completely secure. And that's a place where I maybe draw some criticisms from my own party that I believe that the border needs to be secure. At the same time, immigration has always been and will be a source of innovation and labor that this country needs, especially during times of a growing economy. And what's particularly interesting about this time period we're in is we are not having many kids as Americans. We're not having a replacement rate of kids, so the population would be shrinking. And that doesn't bode well for programs like Social Security, where it depends on folks joining the workforce, paying into Social Security to take care of older folks. especially in industries like hospitality, agriculture, construction. These are places that we need labor, and immigration will play a role, but right now it's out of control.
Again, we're speaking with Thomas Witkop. He is running for Congressional District 21, United States Congress, which is, of course, here on the Treasure Coast, northern Palm Beach County, St. Lucie County, Martin County. Does it go into Indian River County?
No.
Not in Indian River County, but there you have it. So let's go on here a little bit on the immigration. Do you believe that increasing or decreasing the number of work visas, such as the H-1B visas, and how do you balance the need of American workers with the needs of employers for foreign talent?
I would expand the avenues of legal immigration. Again, I'm completely against any illegal crossings of the border, but as far as expanding, I mean, we have fruit that is rotting on trees here in Florida because we just don't have the labor to pick it off. And there are creative solutions like, bringing people in seasonally to help address, crops, or bring people in when there's a booming construction or there's infrastructure that needs to be built. I mean, these are folks that I actually just read 2 days ago. There's a national shortage of roofers. Tons of people need their houses roofed, but we just don't have the laborers. And this is something that I think a lot of immigrants could help out with.
And what is your position on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA protection for Dreamers?
The DACA protection for Dreamers. So just 2 weeks ago, I was talking to somebody who was part of Dreamers. I just ran into her, and she said, I love this country. I love everything that it's offering me. And she pays taxes, actually. She pays taxes, and she's never going to Social Security, and she's never going to see that Social Security getting passed back to her because that's not how DACA works. But I support DACA.
And then just one more question. How would you ensure that legal immigration processes, including visa applications and residency programs, are more accessible and streamlined? And I bring this question up. I had a friend, her brother was in Albania, and it wasn't months or weeks for him to get to the United States. It was years.
There's a huge backlog of cases in the immigration courts right now that I think the best way to address is expanding the capacity for the immigration courts so we can move that through so there's less people waiting here. I mean, there's cases, and it's not just, this friend that you have from Albania who should be here, who is probably going to get the cases all set up and ready to go. But it's also people that probably shouldn't be here that are waiting for so long. And, we have to make sure that we are expanding the capacity so folks aren't waiting, like you said, for years.
Where do you stand on gun control and the Second Amendment?
Great question. I am a hunter. I own a Remington 870. I understand that guns are not only an important part of the Constitution, but an important part of this country culturally. At the same time, I don't believe that civilians should have assault rifles or weapons that can inflict devastating damage to, school children and going into schools. So it's obvious that we need sensible gun laws and universal background checks, but at the same time we have to address the root of the situation, which is mental health. There's a very scary epidemic, especially among young men, I think, regarding mental health. And there's a lot of isolation, and there's a lot of the degradation of communities is leading to people being isolated, sinking into social media, and then when they're at this point of psychological brink, the answer for far too many young men is to take a very high-powered rifle to a school and shoot tons of innocent children.
How will you work to improve healthcare access and affordability for the people of CD21? And I bring this up because I have some friends, and even my mom's on this issue. Compounded pharmaceuticals are extremely expensive, and they're compounded. They're not part of an approved prescription program. I've heard up to $10,000 a month on some of these. People can't afford it. So this still is a really big issue, healthcare affordability. So what are your thoughts on trying to make sure that if it's a compounded medicine, for example, there is no prescription that we can get somewhere else? What do we do to help these people?
The United States is one of few developed countries where healthcare is the number one reason for bankruptcy. You get sick or you have to, you come down with an illness or an injury and you have to go bankrupt. That shouldn't exist here in the States. And I think, there's many instances where the United States has got it better than other developed countries, but this is one where we could learn that we need to increase our healthcare to make sure that folks can afford their prescription drugs, and that this isn't something that is breaking the bank. And I mean, this is something that I found really interesting is that Brian Mast voted against decreasing the cost of insulin. And this is something in Canada. It's like a fifth the price as it is here in Florida. So people in Buffalo, diabetics, are going up to Canada, buying their insulin and coming down. It has nothing more to do with the fact that the government in the United States is allowing these big pharmaceutical companies, because they're oftentimes lining the politicians' pockets, to increase their prices artificially high on inelastic goods that we can't live without. So I think that the government has to step in and make sure that these big pharmaceutical companies that are paying their executives gobs and gobs of money, and they're paying politicians to make sure it stays that way, is we make sure that these goods that we cannot live without are reduced in price.
Let's talk about term limits for a second. I know that Brian had actually signed a pledge that he supported term limits, but now, like so many elected officials, they get into office and they forget about that pledge and it goes out the window. So, Thomas, tell us, where do you stand on term limits?
I completely support term limits, and there is that old joke: every politician supports term limits until they get into office. But and this is just full transparency. This is something I think about often. I think the job of congressman, it sounds difficult. It sounds tiring. It sounds like you're constantly trying to create common ground, trying to move the country forward. And I would put every last bit of my energy and my person into that job. I would imagine that after 6 years, I'd be kind of tired of it. I'd be like ready for the next blood, the next perspective, the next person that knows more stuff than me. This is something that I find interesting, is that the average age of Congress, average age of person in Congress, is in their 60s. And it's important to have folks from all different backgrounds, older people. That's critical to have in our democracy. But we need some young people, some people that might have knowledge about social media or artificial intelligence or stuff that I wouldn't necessarily trust my mom to deal with, and she has skills and knowledge that I don't have. I think about the old folks that I know, and that's important. We have the perspective, but we also need young people in there too.
Speaking of social media, I saw that on your website, I think in relation to anti-Semitism and Israel in particular. I'll let you speak to it more, but you were talking about just that, how the younger generation is so influenced by TikTok. It's a brainwashing mechanism that the truth and the real message is not getting out there. So I'm going to let you speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I have developed a really interesting relationship with social media, because on one hand, it allows us to do things that were not possible 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you needed hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to run for an office like this, because you needed to put ads and newspaper ads and TV ads and all these expensive marketing techniques to hit the whole district. Today, I can walk out after this interview, take a 15-second video of me saying, I just did an interview with awesome Casey Ingram, and that might go viral. That could get 50,000 people. That happened just last week to us. And those are local views. So on one hand, I've thought to myself, wow, this could be an instrument for democracy. But on the other hand, we're spending 30% of our waking hours on social media on average as Americans. That's devastating for our mental health. We're giving big tech, and this is another bipartisan place where I see, Republicans are also working to act on this. Big tech has way too much power. We need to regulate them to make sure that, we're protecting our young people and they're not spending so much time on social media. So on one hand, social media is good for folks like me to, practice my freedom of speech, to get my positions out there, to hopefully move this election in a good way. On the other hand, there is that brainwashing mechanism. There are these rabbit holes that need to be regulated, and they're not going to be effectively regulated by the tech heads in Silicon Valley who just want to put you on your phone for as long as possible.
It is interesting. I'm the parent of a teenager, and for me, social media is just so overwhelming. I have a hard time keeping up with just my Facebook page, and there's so much else out there. And as a parent, it's tough for me to always be watching what she's involved with on her phone, and there's just so much access to it. So I think it's refreshing to have a young person like you who understands social media more. You understand all the different platforms, and you've actually seen what comes through across those channels where I'm removed from it myself, and I shouldn't be, but I just am. It's an overwhelming thing.
No, and I have to tell you, I think that it's again so interesting because I'll tell everybody out there to follow my Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you're on, witkoporcongress.com. But at the same time, we have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that our kids, especially, are not being subjected to this very addictive platform.
It is very addictive. It is. How will you protect Social Security and Medicare for seniors, many who live in this district?
Great question. Social Security is critical, and we have to make sure that it's completely protected. And as a young person, the national deficit is particularly troubling to me because this is something that I'll have to deal with. This is something that my children will have to deal with. So Social Security and Medicare and the national defense make up the largest part of our budget. And in order to continue paying for those, we have to increase taxes on the ultra wealthy. I'm not talking about middle class Americans like you and me. I'm talking about folks that are making billions and billions of dollars, folks that can't park their yacht that has another yacht in it in the Fort Lauderdale port. I don't know if you heard about that, but I was flabbergasted.
I didn't, but there's amazing yachts.
Anyways, I just think that, and I think that this is something that we did in the 50s really well. We had a progressive tax rate in the 50s where wealthy folks were taxed at a much higher rate. The corporate tax rate was much higher, and it allowed us to pay for things that helped the middle class, like Social Security.
Speaking of corporate tax rate, the U.S. Corporate tax rate is about 21%. So we're kind of in the middle of the road. Germany's almost 30%, France, Japan, 25, almost 30%. Then you have Cayman Islands, Bermuda, United Arab Emirates onshore at 0%. So we're at 21%. The corporate tax rate is really something I think a lot of the business owners are going to be paying attention to what you say here because I don't think we're excessively high. We're not excessively low either. So where would you stand on your corporate tax rate? It's at 21%. Where do you think it should be?
I think that the corporate tax rate should be at 27%. And again, this is a very sophisticated issue that I read tons about. And I think the biggest point to me is that it's just dropped so much since the 50s, since a time period when America's middle class was exploding and our prosperity was through the roof and our community was through the roof. I mean, neighbors knew one another. I think that this all has to do with our middle class, and I think the corporate tax rate is one way to make sure that the ultra wealthy, this elite class that we have never seen before. I mean, we're talking about like the robber barons of the 21st century are paying their fair share to things like Social Security, education, Medicare, national defense.
That's actually something with tax reform. We'll go to President Trump. Everybody's saying, well, he's not paying his fair share of taxes. Thomas, this comes through Congress. He isn't doing anything illegal. Congress allows all these write-offs. So, if you get elected, how do you go about changing something that it seems to be hard to change? It seems like it makes common sense to make a fair tax. Maybe it's flat tax. I don't know what it is, but it's obviously something that is a tough issue to tackle because you're one of 437? Is that about right? I think.
Yeah. Yes.
People.
Yeah, and that's I don't have a lot of good things to say about former President Trump, but I mean, one thing is he said, I took advantage of the tax code because I could,
Right.
and you would too, and I think that's just him telling the truth, and I think that happens with Democratic billionaires as well.
It does.
So there's no question that we need folks in Congress that are looking out for middle-class Americans rather than billionaires. And I think that we do that by electing folks that aren't getting tons of money from special interests. And I just had another thought, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, let's talk about
Yeah.
that. Getting elected with special interest. That's really, campaign finance reform. I feel strongly about myself needs to be reformed. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, campaign finance reform, it needs to be reformed. There's no question about it. We need to get money out of politics. We need to shorten the election spans as well, I think. I think that these longer and more funded elections are only dividing America and attracting and incentivizing politicians to, shore up their tribe and go to political battle with the opposing party.
So, when it comes to voting, how you ensure that the elections in Florida remain fair and accessible, and what is your position on voting rights?
This is something that is the vote is the brick of democracy that is the House. If we don't have accessible voting, the House will fall. And I just heard something about the Returning Citizens Act. I mean, that was overwhelmingly supported. The amendment that gave felons the right to vote was overwhelmingly supported by Floridians. And after that was passed, there was all of these things done to make it harder for returning citizens or felons to vote. And this is one of the most shocking parts of the campaign trail, is going into especially disenfranchised communities, especially black neighborhoods, and hearing them say, I always ask, what's your number one issue? And so many of them say, I'd love to be able to vote. I've served my time. And I should also say, this isn't just a black issue. There are lots of white people I've talked to as well and they said, I've served my time. I've come back. I want to engage in our democracy. That's part of being an American, and I still can't vote. And sometimes it brings me to tears. I choke up about it. But this democracy is so important to me that it breaks my heart when we make it inaccessible for folks.
I'm not going to get through all my questions, so I could spend 2 hours with you. Karen Resoniti, she said, I hope your viewers are really listening to Thomas. I think he is the answer to many of our problems. Working across the aisle is key. I think he can unlock that door. Good luck, Thomas.
Oh, my gosh. Thank you, Karen.
And thank you, Karen, for tuning in. What should the U.S. policy be regarding the war in Ukraine and support for the Ukraine sovereignty against Russian aggression?
Yeah, there's got to be accountability. There's got to be oversight, and we have to make sure that we're supporting democracies abroad. So often, America steps its foot into a costly and lengthy war that we don't want to be in, but Ukraine is not one of them. Ukraine has a bunch of guys out there that are fighting for democracy. They are shedding their own blood, and the U.S. needs to do what we can to support them to defeat Vladimir Putin, who is nothing but an authoritarian dictator. And that's something that I didn't expect I'd have to stand so strong on with a lot of folks. I go around and I hear people kind of sympathizing, and I have to tell you, this is especially on the right, sympathizing with Vladimir Putin, saying, oh, he's a strong leader, this and that. And I just think to myself, this guy is a liar. He kills his critics. This is the opposite of democracy, the opposite of American. We have to stand up to him.
How do you believe the United States should respond to growing instability in the Middle East, and what should our policy be towards countries like Iran and Israel? Big topic right now.
Big topic. So, any anti-Semitism or terrorism is wrong and should be condemned by the United States, period. In the same vein, we have to maintain our status as a leader on the world stage. And the conflict in Israel and Gaza right now is destroying the perception of so much of the world of the United States. So we have to make sure that we support Israel as as a very important ally, but we have to understand that Netanyahu has no interest in peace, and we have to work towards just that, peace, and reducing this conflict and de-escalating.
Alicia Parental, thank you for tuning in. She said Election Day should be a national holiday with in-person one-day voting. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Election Day should be a national holiday. There are so many national holidays that make great sense, but this is the core of our democracy. So yes, national holiday.
I agree too, and let's get rid of all this early voting stuff. So it used to be one day, so I'm good for getting back to that. How should the United States address the rise of China as a global economic and military power?
Yeah, and China is what I consider to be the largest threat to the United States unipolar power, and that is a lot of interesting developments in China actually recently. They're struggling with birth rate as well, and they're looking at a population implosion, which not a lot of folks are aware of, but that's going to do a number on their economy, which is, I think, maybe 60% of our GDP is what China has. And I should restate that. China's GDP is 60% of what our GDP is. So we're still firmly the economic leader in the world, and we need to maintain that by creating relationships with folks in Africa and folks in developing countries, which China's doing a really good job of doing. And we have to make sure that we're competing on a world stage.
What is your position for the United States involvement in NATO and other international alliances?
So, there are some imbalances in it. I support NATO firmly, but there are some imbalances. I mean, Western Europe needs to chip in more to help NATO to make sure that Russia, for instance, is stopped from invading Ukraine. I mean, they're more at jeopardy than we are, given that they're sharing the same continent with Russia. So we have to make sure that they're paying more to that force that is for democracy. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that it's up and running.
And what is your position on the U.S. foreign aid budget? Do you believe we should increase or decrease foreign aid spending?
This is one of those instances where I need to do more reading. Reagan increased foreign aid by a lot, and I think that was pretty good for the country and the world. So my inclination is to increase foreign aid, but at the same time, we are dealing with things here in the States that need to be addressed. We're dealing with an affordability crisis here. So I'd have to give you a more nuanced answer to that.
And let's talk a little bit about the reversal of Roe v. Wade. What is your stance on that? And, it brought the power and the decisions back to the state. What is your opinion?
My fiance and I, if she were to get pregnant, unless there was a threat to her life or, some exceptional circumstance, we would not have an abortion, because that's how I feel about that. But I don't think that it should be up to politicians to make that decision for couples like my fiance and I. I think that it should be up to doctors, for instance. I mean, let's say that Melody and I she gets pregnant and there is some sort of complication. I don't want to have to consult with the government or the politicians. I want to be talking to an expert that says, look, this is what we need to do and this is what we need to do now. So that's, I believe, like 69% of Floridians, that overturning Roe v. Wade was a mistake and that it should be left, intact and protected federally.
Folks, we've been spending this hour with the youngest candidate for U.S. Congress, and for those who think that the young people are lost and they're not involved anymore, I think that they have a different opinion after listening to Thomas today. You can look more information up about Thomas at witkopforcongress.com, WITKOP, witkopforcongress.com. This is Thomas Witkop. He's running on the Democratic ticket on CD21. Thomas, why do you believe you are the best candidate to represent CD21?
Because I'm not bought by special interests. Just plain and simple. I am running because I care about my community. I'm running because I care about the environment that is so dear to folks on the Treasure Coast, and I'm running to support our democracy and bring folks together from all different political backgrounds, from all different backgrounds. I'm not bought by special interests, and I'm not bought by a political party. And I just wanted to reiterate that I'm so grateful to be on the show and for the work that you do, Casey. And I hope that Congressman Mast shows up, and I hope that we have a good debate where he can answer to his legislative decisions.
I hope that there is a debate as well between you and Congressman Mast. Personally, I find it disappointing, especially incumbents that don't want to debate anymore. Why not? This is a time to let voters decide who best represents them. Why are you afraid to hide about what you stand on and what your beliefs are? So I think it disenfranchises voters. I really do hope you get that chance to debate.
And we got to hold politicians on both sides of the aisle to their feet to the
100%.
fire. I mean, it's like this is how democracy is created, by talking to folks from different perspectives, and we cannot be hiding in our tribes and going into our shell and practicing party elitism. Oh, I'm too good to debate with a challenger because he hasn't raised $10 million or he's not a billionaire,
We had a real eye-opening here in Martin County, as you know, with our primary elections, which are our elections, and the incumbents, all but one, as far as on the city and county level, were ousted. And there was nobody wanted to debate. They didn't want to show up to candidate forums, and it really was surprising. I think a lot of people were shocked. So to your point that you don't need as much money anymore, and social media is a real good way to get the voice out, folks, it really does work. Our District 1 commission race. The incumbent had over $160,000, and the challenger had about $25,000, and she won astoundingly. So it's really just getting the word out. I appreciate you coming on the show. This is one of those avenues where we can just get to meet you. Alicia, she came back and said, nicely done, Thomas. So they really appreciate hearing from you. Thomas, how will you stay connected to the needs of constituents while serving in Washington, D.C.?
I am very available. I'm, again, 25 years old, so I've got all the energy and all the time to listen to my constituents and to make sure that they can reach out to me. Again, witkopforcongress.com. Ask me any questions. Email me at thomas@witkopforcongress.com. I would love to talk to you about your questions and how I can best support you.
What do you think, and we have just 3 minutes, what do you think are the most important values and qualities as a member of Congress?
I think being able to, A, stick to your principles and not let special interests buy you off. B, make sure that you bring folks together and listen to perspectives that you might not agree with, but you can understand. I mean, that's so often, even in the most hot issues, I understand where folks are coming from, but I just go another way. And I think it's important that we can at least understand one another, even if we don't go that direction as a country. So not being bought by special interests and being open-minded to the other side.
And how do you plan to handle disagreements with your party, and would you be willing to break rank?
Absolutely. And this is an instance, this is something I learned running for this seat, this is an instance where you can break rank because, I mean, Florida's 21st congressional district is so contested. It's almost split down the middle, Democrats versus Republicans, that if and when I say, listen, you the Democratic Party, I didn't take a nickel from you. I'm not beholden to you. I'm going to vote this way instead of how you want me to vote. They can't really do anything about it because they need this seat. So we're in a really special circumstance where we don't need politicians that are so aggressively one party or another. Brian Mast just bragged about voting against Democrats more than any other Florida politician. We need somebody that's bragging about solving problems more than any other Florida politician.
And working across the aisle, for sure. That's how it gets done. You're younger. We talked about social media, TikTok, all this. What would you do to strengthen U.S. cyber defense capabilities in response to increasing cyber attacks from foreign actors?
I think that's a budget issue, and we have to make sure that our national defense is allocating its money effectively and adapting to the present needs that we have with cybersecurity.
Thomas Witkop, this has been a wonderful hour, and I really appreciate getting to know you and hearing where you stand on a lot of different issues. Folks, I wish we had more time. I have a ton of questions I could be asking, but we're down to less than a minute now. I want to close out the show to let you reach out to your voters, and before we do that, witkopforcongress.com, WITKOP, forcongress.com is his website. Lots of information on there. Folks can reach out and help you. I'm going to let you close out the show in about 30 seconds.
I just want to say thanks again, Casey, and thank you to all the local journalists who are doing such great work this year. And make sure to, invite your neighbors over for a get-together, talk to them about politics. You don't even have to agree on the same things. You don't have to be from the same party, but it's important we all get out and vote this year. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me at witkopforcongress.com or Facebook, or join me at any of my headquarters. Thanks so much, and take it away, Casey.
Thomas Witkop, appreciate it. Next week, we're going to have Aaron Hawkins on. He's running for the